Cristiano Ronaldo stared at the letter in his hands. The edges yellowed with time, the ink slightly faded. He had received countless letters in his lifetime. Fan mail, business proposals, invitations, but something about this one felt different. His fingers trembled as he traced the handwritten address on the envelope. It came from Madeira, his hometown, and it was dated years ago. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Why was this only reaching him now? He hesitated before unfolding the paper inside, his heart pounding with an unshakable sense of unease. "Cristiano, I don't know if this will reach you, but I had to try." His eyes raced over the words, his breath catching in his throat. "Things haven't been easy. I don't know where else to turn. I just wanted to talk, to hear your voice, to remember what it was like when we were just two kids chasing the same dream. I'm proud of you, brother. Always have been. But if you ever get this, please come find me. I could really use a friend right now." The world around him faded. His mind reeled back to the streets of Madeira, to the boy he once called his best friend, David. They had been inseparable once, playing football barefoot on dusty roads, talking about how one day they'd make it out. But while Cristiano's talent had taken him to Sporting CP at just 12 years old, David had stayed behind. They promised to stay in touch, to never let the distance come between them. But life had a way of moving too fast. Cristiano felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Why hadn't he heard from David in all these years? He glanced back at the letter, reading it again, searching for a clue, anything that would tell him where David was now. His hands shook as he reached for his phone. He needed to find him. He needed to know if he was okay. The call to his mother was brief, but the silence on the other end told him everything. "David is gone, Chris," she said softly. "He passed away, years ago." The words hit him like a blow to the chest. He hadn't seen David in over a decade, and now he never would. His childhood friend had reached out, desperate, hoping for a lifeline. But the letter had arrived too late. He had arrived too late. Guilt spread through his body like fire. What had David been going through? Had he suffered alone? And the worst thought of all, had he given up hope, thinking that Cristiano had abandoned him? For days he could think of nothing else. He cancelled training, ignored calls from his agent. At night, sleep evaded him. Haunted by memories of their childhood, David's laughter, his voice, the way they had once sworn they would always have each other's backs. Had he broken that promise? Determined to understand what had happened, he flew back to Madeira. It had been years since he walked these streets, but the past greeted him at every corner. The old football pitch where they had spent countless hours was cracked and faded now. The house where David once lived was empty, abandoned. He found David's mother in a small, dimly lit apartment. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she simply stared. Then she broke down in tears. "He waited for you, Cristiano," she whispered. "He never blamed you. He was proud of you. But life was cruel to him." Through her shaking voice, she told him the truth. David's family had struggled for years. He had tried to make it as a footballer, but was never given the same opportunities. Injuries, bad luck, and financial hardships had kept him trapped. He had written to Cristiano as a last hope, but when no answer came, his spirit faded. Cristiano sat there, speechless, the weight of regret crushing him. He had been so consumed with his own journey, training, matches, contracts, that he had let go of the one person who had always believed in him, long before the fame. And now, he would never get the chance to tell David he had never forgotten him. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't let David's story end in silence. The next few weeks became a mission, an obsession. Cristiano made calls, met with officials, and used every resource at his disposal. Soon, the plans were in motion. In the very heart of Madeira, on the same ground where two boys once dreamed of greatness, a new academy was being built. David's name would not be lost to time. His dream, helping young players who had the talent but not the resources, would live on. The Ronaldo and David Football Academy would be a sanctuary for kids who, like them, had once played barefoot on the streets, hoping for a chance. Months later, as Cristiano stood at the opening ceremony watching dozens of children take their first steps onto the field, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. Before leaving, he walked to the entrance of the academy, where a plaque had been mounted. On it, engraved in gold letters, was a quote from David's letter. "If you can, come find me. But if you can't, just promise me you'll remember." Cristiano placed his hand over the plaque, eyes glistening. "I remember," he whispered, "and I always will." Cristiano lingered by the plaque, tracing the engraved letters with his fingertips. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying distant echoes of laughter from the children playing on the pitch. For a brief moment he swore he could hear David's voice, young, carefree, full of life. "We'll make it out of here one day, Chris, you and me together." The memory hit him like a tidal wave. He closed his eyes, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had built stadiums, won trophies, cemented his place in history. Yet standing here, on this modest field in Madeira, he realized that this was the most important thing he had ever done. But something still felt unfinished. That night he sat alone in his hotel room staring at David's letter. He read it over and over, searching for something more. Then a thought struck him. Was this really the only letter David had sent? Or were there more that had never reached him? His pulse quickened. He needed answers. The next morning he made a call to the local postal service explaining the situation. At first they were skeptical, but when they realized who was on the line, they agreed to investigate. Hours later, Cristiano received a call that sent shivers down his spine. There was another letter. He rushed to the post office, where an elderly worker handed him a second envelope. This one even more tattered than the first. The ink was smudged, but he could still make out David's handwriting. Hands shaking, he opened it right there. "Chris, I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe just to feel like I still have a friend out there. Life's getting harder. My mum's sick. I tried to keep playing, but I can't even afford a pair of boots anymore. I watch you on TV sometimes, and man, I'm happy for you, but I won't lie. It hurts too. It hurts knowing that we used to be side by side and now we live in different worlds. I don't blame you. I never will. But if you ever get this, just remember me, okay? That's all I ask." Cristiano's grip tightened around the paper. His vision blurred. This wasn't just a letter. It was a cry for help, and he had never heard it. He staggered back, inhaling sharply as guilt crashed over him like a storm. How different could David's life have been if this letter had reached him in time? If he had known, would things have turned out another way? The weight was unbearable. For years, Cristiano had thought of his success as a testament to his hard work, his resilience. But what about David's hard work? His resilience? He had fought just as hard but had never been given a chance. Cristiano clenched his jaw. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. The next few weeks became a relentless pursuit of something more. He poured himself into the academy, ensuring that no child would ever feel abandoned the way David had. He personally funded scholarships, bought equipment, and even sent scouts to look for hidden talent in the poorest neighborhoods. But it wasn't enough. David had suffered in silence. How many others were suffering right now? How many young players were being overlooked, not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked privilege? Cristiano's mind was made up. He needed to go bigger. He called a press conference. The world expected a retirement announcement. Instead, they got something else entirely. "I've been blessed with success," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But today, I want to talk about someone who didn't get the same chance. His name was David. He was my best friend. He was just as talented, just as passionate, but life wasn't fair to him, and I can't change that. But I can make sure it doesn't happen to others." He took a deep breath. "That's why I'm launching the David Foundation, a global initiative to find and support young footballers who have the talent, but not the resources. No child should have to give up on their dreams because they can't afford boots. No player should be ignored just because they don't have connections. We're going to change that, and we're going to do it in David's name." The room fell silent. Then the applause erupted. The story went viral. Fans, players, even rival clubs rallied behind the cause. Donations poured in. Sponsors lined up. The foundation became bigger than he had ever imagined, and with every young player it helped, Cristiano felt like he was getting a small piece of David back. Months later, he returned to Madeira one last time before the season started. He walked alone to the small cemetery on the outskirts of town where David was buried. He placed a signed jersey beside the grave, one with David's name printed on the back. "You should have been there with me, brother," he whispered, "but I promise you this. You'll never be forgotten." A soft wind blew through the trees, and for a moment Cristiano could almost hear it again. "We'll make it out of here one day, Chris. You and me. Together." Cristiano nodded, wiping his eyes. "Yeah, David," he murmured. "We did." And as he turned to leave, he felt lighter than he had in years, because he finally knew that in the only way that mattered, David's dream had come true.